They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that college promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet, eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight we are joined by someone diving into our history as a collection of humans on a planet called Earth. We are told the science is settled, but we all know better. In finding the truth of our chronology, we have one fearless warrior who wades through all the muck, applying logic and measure as he goes, bringing us the best bits and analyses of all of his work, and we are lucky to have someone so studied to talk with us on Rogue Ways tonight. Welcome, Stephen Sorensen of SeeTruth.today. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am pretty good as well. It has been a pretty decent day. It's nice and warm here, but there's still snow on the ground, which is like my perfect combo. Like, I love snow, but I also like sun, so it's just like excellent and beautiful.
Yeah, that's the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Well, I always like to remind people that if you are listening out there and you need a boost or a reconnection to some higher vibes or some spiritual energies or messages, you can check out rogueways.org and get in touch with all kinds of things that I do for you. I have signed copies of my novels. I have Orgone energy accumulator jewelry. I have tarot readings, and I have guided sessions and so much more. And also, of course, as always, go to rogue.locals.com to join up with the community, connect, talk with us, chat with us, post your favorite things, all that sort of stuff. So come connect further. And Stephen, we always start with a pointless question of the episode. And so I wanted to ask you what you call the part of the chicken that like sticks off their head or hangs off under their neck.
Oh, what is that called? I do not know off the top of my head.
You don't have a Stephen word for it?
No Stephen words for that.
See, I guess it was a bad question to start with then.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think I've heard it before. I've probably definitely heard it.
Okay,
Do you know what it's called?
The official name, I'll just first of all say that my word for it is doodles. These are their doodles. Their doodles flop off their head and hang off their chin, and that seems like a very fitting name to me, is their doodles. But their official name is comb. It's their comb.
Their comb?
Yes.
That kind of makes sense. It kind of looks like a comb.
Yeah. It sticks up and
yeah,
it's like
but
got fingers.
I can get behind naming them doodles officially.
Doodles makes more sense to me.
We got to contact the dictionary owner here somewhere.
And goats have little things that hang down, and those are called dongles. Not officially, just in my language.
Oh, okay.
Just so we're all clear. My chicken basically is suffering with something on her comb, so I was like looking, I was like, what's wrong with my chicken's doodle? Then I was like, oh yeah, that is not the word for it. This is just my word for it. Time to get real. Anyway, so Stephen, I always like to go back to the beginning with people on the show and ask you, what was your early life like? We want to know like why you got to where you are.
Why I got to where I am, there's so many factors in the world, but I can give a brief overview. So I was born in Detroit, 1995. I'm 25 today. History, that's what I'm really focused on presently, but I haven't always been focused on that. I've had my website for 2 years or so. I was kind of doing independent research after high school. I dropped out of high school to get my GED and
nice job.
And yeah, the thing in high school was I felt like there was just so much wasted time, like where we could be learning and studying, and really everything that we were learning I could find on the internet. So it wasn't like I was getting access to any like occult knowledge or things that I have to go there to learn, except for maybe obedience and being on a schedule, someone else's clock.
That's all it's for.
That you can learn outside of school anyways. So it just seemed trivial to me. I went the other route and continued on independently on my studies from any institution, and that carried on for a while. But eventually, I got to the point where I was posting on social media and I was repeating myself a lot, and I just finally, there were so many different factors into me making a website, which is like what I spend most of my time on now, is the website and studying. And it's interesting. I was looking into history at the time. Maybe I can't remember how old I was. I have an article on my website that traces all this, because the memory, it can be fickle.
Very.
But when you have stuff written down, that's a lot harder to change.
Well, you and I started a website for the exact same reason, which is to organize our thoughts and keep a record of what we were doing and thinking, because otherwise, I don't know if you found this, but I'd be talking to someone like a week after I researched something. I'd be like, dude, it's like this, and then there's this and this other thing, and then they'd be like, well, where did you get that, or where did you learn it? And I'm like, fuck, like I can't remember. And so I was like, okay, if I have a site that I'm like writing what I learned and like where I got it and all of this stuff, which, I've lost a lot of that because I had my first site stolen. Anyway, it's a long story, but we had the same impetus. I also want to throw in there that I could have been your teacher from, I think, when you were 12 on. That's our age. That's how long I was teaching, how long ago I started teaching, and how young you were when I did.
Word.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's cool that we share a similar inspiration there, because that was kind of the thing. It was like, I have opinions about things and I want to be able to back those up with my reasoning.
Evidence.
Yeah, and so the idea of having a public place to put everything I'm looking into one spot seemed like the logical next step to organizing my thoughts and sharing them. And so far, it's proved to be really useful. I've been able to, now I can still post on social media, but I can post the article that I've written where I've collected my thoughts and really kind of thought them over. I've put it into paper, into writing. So, like sometimes when you're thinking, you're like, oh, this is a good idea. And then you go through with it and you're like, what was I thinking? Like when it's down on paper, in effect, it's different than when it's all mental and hypothetical. So
yeah, it really gives structure to it and helps you self-reflect upon it, which is a big part of why as teachers, we often ask students to do so. If we're good teachers, which are rare, we ask students to do something with what they've learned, like create a website or do anything else really with it. Because I bet you found this over time too, that you've had to structure and restructure all of the thoughts as they're added in and kind of reorganize them. So you're actually like showing over time your own schema in your mind as they change.
So yeah, one thing I have learned while I've had the website is how to improve my presentation. And looking back on how my articles were formatted and written when I first started compared to where they are now, it's like two completely different people.
What a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I know that there's the philosophy of no man ever steps in the same river twice, because he's not the same person and it's not the same river. But it's like really contrasting the two differences, just how much someone can improve over a couple of years, and just it makes me wonder as to why more people haven't done this, that are interested in the subjects that I'm interested in, which is history and epistemology, if I can boil them down to two root things, which is understanding what happened in the past and understanding how we can
understand it.
Yeah, it gets pretty meta sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, it's really fascinating. Well, I would venture to guess that there are lots of people who have done it, but we may not be familiar with their work because so many things get buried every time the algorithms change,
That's true, yeah. The websites do get taken down and removed, and so...
Or we just stop seeing them.
Destroyed.
Because the algorithms stop letting us see them. So it could be, but I don't actually know because I haven't dug far enough into your works, which is why I'm excited for you to share it with us. So you just started becoming interested in history after high school just randomly, or like what made you excited about that?
So no, we can get back to basics real quick. Growing up, I didn't realize how nice and privileged it was to get a private education, but I did get private education, and I so I learned like some pretty advanced history stuff early on,
Hmm.
and it stuck with me throughout the years, as well as other topics too, like English. I remember I had a friend in high school that was telling me about what he learned in his 12th grade English class, and I was 2 years under him, and so he didn't think I had learned it yet, but it was stuff I had learned in like third or fourth grade that it really put it into this is as I'm in high school starting to think of like what a waste of time this is. Like these kids have never even been exposed to a lot of this information before, and I had already kind of been open to it, and so it gave me some insight into just how different educational styles can lead to the differences in the people. And yeah, that's a real trip on its own, just to talk about the state of education, much less the state of history education, which is something I've been paying more attention to now that I'm back in school trying to get a bachelor's in history. To my advantage or disadvantage, it's hard to determine, but yeah, it's pretty weird. So yeah, and when I was growing up, I got a decent history education. I had studied it throughout high school. I'd always been interested in studying, and so beyond the school curriculum, I had been doing my own types of studies, and I had an interest in religion and philosophy and history for a while, but I didn't really start taking a more organized approach to it until my later teen years, like 18 or 19 or 20. And then really once I started my website is when I first started taking like serious steps towards organization and sorting things out. And I have it written down. I think it was last September I came up with probably the most advanced organization method that I use currently, which is just mass citations throughout all my stuff. So like every single thought that I get from somewhere else, I can see exactly where that came from to make sure I'm using it correctly and I'm not misrepresenting someone else's work, and I can catch myself if I make any mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I have commenting available. My website's www.ctruth.today. C-truth is in the letter C, truth.
Link in the description.
Click the link, and that's where I'm at. That's what I have commenting available on every single page of that website, so that if I do have something wrong, people can point that out. I'm not opposed to being wrong on anything, and really, like, I've joked about getting a tattoo or something that says everything I say could be wrong, so don't just take me at my word for it.
Well, if every human was honest, that's what they would be saying too, and no one would even have to think about it, because we'd all understand that like that's just the way life is. You know,
and it's humanity is very interesting because there are people out there who want to deceive you, and so it's like, even though I am honest, just because other people out there that claim to be honest as well, it puts my own reputation into question too. And so the way that I would suggest determining if I am being sincere or honest is by evaluating my works or having a conversation with me. I'm really easy to contact. So yeah, I try to be as transparent as possible, but it is trippy. I look into the world of deceit and deception throughout history because I don't want to be deceived, and you need to know your enemy. And so if deception is the enemy, you got to look into that a bit. And it's been surprising to me just how few people look into it from a historical perspective. There's only a handful of scholars in the world that are dealing with authentication and how to determine fake from real, or even accurate interpretations of the historical evidence. It's really interesting stuff.
Why do you think that is? Because part of my guess would be that it is not funded and there are no jobs, and so it would be a purely like you enjoy doing this and so you do it sort of thing for the most part.
Are you asking me why do I think it is that people try to deceive other people?
No, that so few people are into authenticating and how to, understanding how to determine whether or not what we have learned from the past is true or not.
Well, I think potentially it's because that's a really recent type thing. It is kind of epistemological. It's called, for at least when we're dealing with written records, it's called diplomatics, and it's the science of detecting the genuineness of an article. And so this can be applied to like, it's 1700s, I think, is the father of diplomatics, the guy that's considered to have established it as a more serious discipline with some guidelines. But even then, it's diplomatics, the gauging the authenticity of a document. That's really fundamentally epistemological or eletheological, for gauging the nature of truth or knowledge. And so that in itself, word epistemology was coined because it showed there were people talking about it prior to that, but that's really when it started to become more systematic. And it's really when a lot of things start to become more systematic, is during the 1800s. And yeah, it's
the century of systematization.
yeah. And so back to the question of why people aren't interested in studying this, it's just never really been a serious thing that's been prominent. It's more prominent, or popular at least, to study the wars and the history of the military, or to study the Tudor line, or any sort of area in history, the overarching, like, have your sole focus be on authentication. It's a really specific area to be looking into. And as you were saying, like, maybe the job market plays into it. There's really not as many jobs, I don't think, for people to authenticate these items.
Because especially if history is, if by many forces trying to be hidden, then they're not going to want to pay people to try to authenticate things. Being
that's true.
Whoever might be hiding things.
That's true. But also, I will mention, there are those jobs out there. So if you want to become that, like, potentially you could get employed as that. Or if you market yourself in the right way too, you could become employed as that if you have the proper qualifications. Even if you didn't, as I was talking about with fake people, you could, if you can convince someone that you're able to do that, True. Then that can be good enough to do it as a job. But I don't advocate you do that. I advocate to keep things as simple as possible. It's already difficult enough to figure out what's happened in the past without active players adding to that.
Yeah.
So
it's a really good point.
Don't misrepresent yourself to the best of your abilities. Don't do that. That's my explicit advocation for that.
Agreed. Well, what are some of your greatest influences then as you're doing this work? Do you have people who you follow and have really shaped what you are doing?
Well, I could think of some people off the top of my head that their standard for work is admirable, where I really look up to anybody that takes their entire life and throws it into one subject. Like, they don't do anything else aside from that. I do take time out of my day to do other things. And I guess, like, these people probably do spend time with their families as well and friends, but I spend time with my family and my friends, and I play video games with my friends and with my girlfriend. And so I take a bit of time out of my life to do things other than just study, but the overwhelming majority of my time is on this. And so I try to spend my time as effectively as possible. I think discussions like this are worth my time, for meeting new people and sharing my ideas and hearing feedback, because it's a wide world, tons of different types of people. I barely know you at all, and so you could say some stuff that would change my life forever, and there's only one way that's ever going to be able to happen, is if I get here and we interact with each other. So
that's a great way to look at interacting with new people. I have never thought about it that way. Like, I always look at it as like, ooh, what's this person gonna bring? Like, this is exciting. But I didn't really frame it like that in my mind. I love that. That's beautiful. And yeah, if people don't know, we just met today, 2 minutes before the show started, and it was a show that was suggested on Sunday? Very recently.
Sunday. I think you hit me up on Facebook through my Facebook page, and that was on Sunday.
I think it was Saturday that you were suggested to me by Weaving Spiders Welcome. So it was quick.
Yeah, that was the people that set us up for this discussion, and I think it was specifically Snake Jones who did that.
Could be.
I was on their show last year, I think at the end of the year, and they had told me about you, saying that we might get along if we had to talk. And so far, I'd say their judge of character was correct. I've been enjoying this.
That's awesome. Me too. Let's actually just get into it. What is C-Truth? What does it stand for and why?
So yeah, C-Truth is it's the collection of materials that I've created based off of my studies. And so where it's one part kind of like my effort to study history. It's also that collection of content that I've created based off of those studies. And so why is See Truth? Because as already previously mentioned, I had been kind of interested in philosophy, religion, and epistemology, trying to figure out what really happened. I wanted to know if I was believing in things that were true. And so I started evaluating what I was thinking. I was working on a history of American education because my schooling experience was so impactful on the way I saw things. And as I was starting to think about writing a book for that, I came across this theory called Fomenko's New Chronology. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, I feel like I've heard of it on other conspiracy podcasts. Would that be?
I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory. I wouldn't call it that, just based off of what I've seen. But there are people that call it that. But I ran across this. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and so I put that whole history education thing on pause and started looking into ancient history and how do we verify stuff. And that's where See Truth kind of sprouted out of. Was I needed to get a lot more organized if I was going to try and tackle verifying, validating or invalidating this Fomenko's New Chronology stuff. And so I created See Truth on January 2nd, 2019, so just a little over 2 years ago. And it has been a huge learning experience. It's gotten way more organized, and it has tons of content on there about history. And again, there's commenting on every single page. I don't get very many comments, but I have gotten some really helpful comments from people. So if you're one of those commenters, thank you for commenting.
That would be very nice. Well, what is Fomenko? What his idea, and what's your beef with him?
Right. So Fomenko's New Chronology is this theory, this argument that human civilization dawned maybe 1,200 years or so ago, which is more recent. I think the popular notion is maybe like 3,000 to 5,000 BCE. So
7,000 years ago or so.
Yeah, 5,000 to 7,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the general traditional view is. That
we're like Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization type stuff was like back then. But he's saying it's way
that's what's being
sooner.
taught in schools and popular curriculums, at least. And there's going to be variations between schools, but most people are taught that. And this is so 1,200 years ago. That's radically shortened the timeline of human civilization, and it's my beef with it. I don't know if I would call it beef. I guess if anything that is a conflict or a spot where I part from it, I do have some beef with some of the stuff in there, but that's kind of to be expected on something as large of a scope as this. And I don't have really beef with any of the core things that he's proposed yet. It's more so minor errors here and there that are understandable in their error, because this has been going on. It's 50 years in the making. It's not just him either. It's a group of individuals working together to publish this stuff, and over 50 years information changes and there's new discoveries every year that come to light. And so what might be reported 10 years ago is going to be different 10 years in the future. And I think maybe that's what's going on with some of the errors that I have found so far, just outdated ideologies. But the core functions of it, the textual analysis and the astronomical stuff, that's what I've been trying to learn more, to be able to really dissect it and explain exactly what he's doing. From my understanding of it, it does look convincing. I've dissected it quite a bit. And so I think that there are some things that need to be accounted for. But as far as saying for sure, like for certain, I don't know. And I want more professionals to look at it to get a more well-rounded take on it. So far, it's basically just like ridiculed. There have been some critiques that maybe have a little bit of weight to them, but like to suss those out from the just blatant libel and slander, it's difficult. And so
and it
I'm
sucks
still trying to
when
get together some people to do that.
and it sucks when the people doing that are the people who are supposed to be like the height of academic study, and they can't even use like actual logic. You know, like they have to resort to name calling, and I'm like, well, that's the fastest way to show that you don't actually have ideas, or you don't actually have anything to say, you know, but that you're scared or upset about this idea. You know, that's clear. But nothing else is, and all you've done is muddy the waters and like really lowered yourself, you know. And I like that you have a focus on logic and rationale and evidence, because that's how it should be.
Well, it's interesting because firstly, I think that you can insult someone and still have a point. I don't recommend it. I think that it doesn't have a place in academic discussion,
Yeah.
but I think that even with an insult, you could be correct. You're just being very out of your way rude about it. Also from Yenka, he comments on this, that basically the responses are, so the critiques that are made, this is the general scheme of things to my understanding, is that there's, for every argument, you have your premises and your conclusions. And you could have all your premises right and get the conclusions wrong. But if they aren't right, then you won't get a correct conclusion. And so people tend to attack the conclusions that he's written, his reconstruction based off of his initial results. So he to what I understand, he discovered these really interesting correlations throughout narrative records and astronomical phenomenon, and they needed to be accounted for by historians. So either they can be written off as to be ignored, or they can be accounted for, and history would need to be reconstructed in a way that accounts for what's been discovered through these new scientific methods. And they don't attack the reasons for the reconstruction. They just attack the reconstruction itself without understanding why he's done anything that he's done.
And that's a logical fallacy.
So yeah, definitely fallacious. And I don't blame them. It's easier to attack a straw man than a steel man. And so that's why I encourage people, if you ever do want to get into arguments and refuting other people, the best way to go about that is to learn how to steel man their argument. Because if you can't, what steel manning is representing someone's argument in the best light possible.
Yeah.
Like, or at least as accurately as close to what they're saying as possible. So if you can't do that, then I don't think that you're really ready to even refute someone's argument, because you can't present it yourself.
Yeah, that used to be like a standard of persuasion, was that you should show that, like, yes, I fully understand what this person's saying, and I still try to refute them using this other point, this other evidence, this other bit of logical whatever. That was like a thing. Now we're just like, I don't know, we've lost a lot, I think.
Yeah, so I see it's very common that they'll attack the straw man, and then they think that they've won or they've made a solid refutation, but they've just attacked this distorted view of what's happened. And it's just counterproductive to trying to figure out what's actually going on. And if it's weird, because as I was talking about the imposters, people have accused him of being a fake and manipulating data and doing all this as a hoax or a forgery to rewrite history. And it's so strange, because from my own studies, from what I've read, is that the faker, the forger, the con artist, they're trying to convince you of something. And so they either do that by modeling what you believe to be, so in this case it's scientific research, he just has to act like how you think scientific research would look like, even if it doesn't look like real scientific research at all, or make it look as close to the real deal as possible regardless of what you think. And so it's kind of weird to look at this, because it looks like it's legit to me that this guy is really doing this. And as far as scientific revolutions go, generally these people, they aren't applauded right away for their discovery, especially if it goes against the grain. Like Einstein's theory of relativity, if I'm not mistaken, was ridiculed. It's still ridiculed by some today, but it was ridiculed by the general scientific community when it came out. There's Do you know what the Semmelweis effect is?
No.
I think that's what it's called, but it's this Dr. Semmelweis. I think that's his name. He's the guy that came up with washing your hands to be more cleanly.
Isn't it funny that washing your hands was like an innovation? It's funny to think about.
It was a taboo even.
Wow.
The reason why it's called the Semmelweis effect is it's because what the effect is you, if you're presented with new information and you reject it because of something you traditionally held true, that's the Semmelweis effect. Even against the evidence, you still believe what you originally believed because that's the first thing you learned.
Which is also a logical fallacy.
It'd be like if you had a quarter and like a thing of salt or something, and you were taught to believe that the quarter was bigger than the thing of salt, even though it's clearly not. Like,
Yeah.
and on any other scale, like you could say like, yeah, you get the point. But it's just like, come on. And so that's, the guy, he came up with washing his hands. He thought it was more hygienic, and his contemporaries laughed at him and ridiculed him, and then it turned out that he was right. And now, as everybody is aware, it's broadcast on the news: wash your hands and stay inside.
But he probably died like seeing everyone still not washing their hands and being like, why, God, why? And now everyone does it, and he's like, okay, thanks a lot, assholes.
Yeah, it must have been like a Twilight Zone episode or something. He finally gets to the library and his glasses break.
Yeah. Well, so what are some of the things that Fomenko found through astrology, or whatever other correlations you were describing that were sort of revolutionary or seemed to be really amazing?
So what put him onto this was, from his report, is that the NASA physicist Robert Russell Newton published a paper on eclipses in 1972. And he, I have read this paper, but he basically shows that the frequency of eclipses changes over the course of, I think, like a 500 or 600 year period in the first millennium AD. So I think this is roughly between 500 and 1000 AD is when this took place. And there's been mixed reviews as to how valid his study is, but basically Fomenko went and reevaluated these eclipses and found that all the eclipses, so when we're talking about astronomical phenomenon, this is like the original clock for timekeeping.
Yeah.
People in the past used the sky. They didn't have stopwatches. That's very new tech. I think the first stopwatches weren't even created until like the 1800s, or maybe a little bit sooner than that. But so basically, these phenomenon, they occur at a relatively easy to determine rate. And so we determine the days and months by the sun and the moon, and years by the sun or the stars. And with the eclipses, they can only occur in certain spots every so often. So like when you can see an eclipse occur in Greece isn't necessarily when you're going to be able to see the eclipse occur in Beijing.
Yeah.
Or for a better example, somewhere else across the globe is the Sydney, Australia. Those eclipse frequencies will be visible on different dates when eclipses are happening. And so what Fomenko did is he went back through the historical records, determined that these eclipses could have taken place more recently. And so I guess it would have been good to preface this, because this is a little known astronomical fact, but even into the 1900s, prior to the computers, we had human calculators, and there was basically mathematicians and astronomers leading up until this thing in the 70s, I think. They had noted that the further back you go in eclipses, or the further back you go in time, the more off the eclipse was from when it was supposed to happen. And this was because the idea was that the motion of the planets was consistent. There wasn't any variation. And because there's no variation, you should be able to calculate back and see that, yes, this eclipse took place when the side of these reports it did. But now the idea is that the spin of the earth is not consistent, or the speed of the moon across the sky is not consistent, and that can vary too. And this is based on this study here to account for this. So they grant the validity of these documents and then create equations to model that, how it would actually look. And so this is NASA and ESA, they have they're the two most popular sources of information for these celestial mapping programs that you can get for your phone or for your computer or your tablet, even, I would imagine now. Yeah, and they have them set up so that the eclipses will show when the records say they show. So if you want to go see through side of these eclipses, they're showing, but only because the program has been formulated to show that. If you did it with the motion of the planets consistent, then it wouldn't show them.
Interesting.
Because it's off.
So, and we already, most of us here at least, don't really trust NASA. So we're like, now you're screwing with things that don't really necessarily make sense, just to make it fit your preconceived notion instead of looking at the evidence and wondering if your notion is wrong.
So yeah, Robert Newton, he was the head. He was, I think, the head of the physics department. Maybe it's been a minute since I looked into him. I've been looking into this for a few years now.
Yeah.
And so he worked for NASA, and he discovered this, and I think eventually got ridiculed. Potentially it affected his career, but he tried to make sense of it. I think he had another theory that Ptolemy, the Greek astronomer, was a forger and that he falsified some of his data. But basically, getting back to Fomenko's new chronology for the eclipse thing, he determined that these eclipses could have happened in the last 1200 years or so, and therefore the motion is consistent. There's no square wave in the graph. It's steady motion for the moon. So these eclipses happen at regular intervals. And so basically until Fomenko's new chronology is refuted, I think it is up for debate as to whether or not it's appropriate to, and it is appropriate in the sense of wanting to see what it would look like if this stuff was all legit.
Yeah.
But as in reality, trying to determine if it's appropriate to make the equations to model it based on the validity of these documents, or if these need to be reassessed, I think that is still a question that needs to be addressed in a more professional manner from more qualified individuals.
So it's like either the moon and the sun, whatever the planets, are moving erratically and history is correct, or they're moving, stably and history is not correct. Right.
Yeah, those are two of the options. And so this isn't just based on eclipses. He didn't call it quits there. There's also this is where the astrology portion comes in. Not so much as astrology, meaning that you're going to have a fiery nature because you were born under Leo or something, but more so astrology is the artistic representation of the night sky. And the ancient people, as far as we can tell, they put importance on the motion of the stars. And so they did believe in the astrological influence, and it was important to record that. And so there are apparently horoscopes, which is a horoscope is where the planets were in the sky and in what houses they were at a certain day and time in history. And so through these, we can determine when they were created. If they're authentic horoscopes, then hypothetically you could retrieve a date off of that. To just like the moon has a repetitious nature, the planets will only ever be in certain positions at certain times. And so it's interesting. It could be that this dude is just hoaxing everyone and we just don't know how to verify it. But it seems like it would be a legitimate scientific inquiry, like a legitimate way of figuring out when something happened or when something was created in the past, to date it like that. And from what I can tell, Fomenko has done more of these datings. He's conducted more tests on all these different things than anyone else in the world has ever touched. He's got, I think, over 50 of these. And that's incredible, even if it is all for the sake of faking it or whatever. Like, he's at least collected all these into one spot, and so it's worth looking at. That's what I'm saying. And it surprises. I've tried to post about this in some physics forums, and they don't want to touch it because it's history. And then also some of them know that it's from Fomenko, and so they don't want to touch it because it's been dubbed a conspiracy theory. But it's like, come on, you can't put that aside to entertain the idea that we're looking at an actual artifact from human history. Like,
yeah,
even if he botched the results to suit his own narrative, it's still a legitimate piece of information that can be used in legitimate historical studies.
It's a huge logical fallacy to dismiss something because it has been labeled, or is connected to a certain person. Like, both of those are huge logical fallacies as well.
I think that is quite literally an ad hominem, to say, because this is a conspiracy theory, this dude's a conspiracy theorist, he can't be correct on any of this.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. So yeah, not only does he do the eclipses and the horoscopes, so mapping the planetary positions, he does a textual analysis. And it shows that these long lines of kingdoms have significant overlaps, synchronisms, parallelisms between the ruling classes, and even through some of the biographical material and the narratives. And when you crunch all that together, it does fit within this last 1200 year period. Wow. And sort of looks like almost a game of telephone. And I could be wrong. Maybe it doesn't. And it just looks like that to me. But like, it's fascinating. I don't know anyone that's educated enough to even discuss it with.
Yeah, that's sad. You put all this work into it, and you don't have anyone that you can like bounce it off of accurately, who's actually willing to think instead of just attack and dismiss based on illogical needs.
Yeah, even in his works, he notes how important it would be and how helpful it would be if there were people that came along like that to offer valid critiques. And so I've done that myself in my own work. I've started to go through his first volume to dissect it sentence by sentence. And so I show what I think is supported and what I think is contradicted and why. And so if he ever were to do a revised edition of his book in the future, I would be a great resource for that, because I've basically done peer review in a sense. I've reviewed his book to suss out what is outdated information and what's legit.
Yeah.
And that could be used in a future edition to be like, look, this is because it's a very obscure realm, chronology. You cannot get a degree in chronology. There's no professors of chronology.
Yeah.
It's such a fundamental subject. I can't even believe it. Like, I just suspend the belief. I'm like, no, there has to be, but there's not.
See, and for me, I'm like, well, that's by design, because we're not supposed to figure out the chronology for some reason, but whether that's true or not, he should be paying you. You should talk to him. You haven't talked to him ever?
Who?
Fomenko? You said if he writes a book in the future, that means he's alive,
I've
right?
hit him up. I've sent him emails. I've definitely sent him one email, but I don't want to bother him too much about it. I don't even know if he speaks English.
I don't think he does. I think he's Russian, right?
He is Russian. I think my friend said he does speak English, but
I thought he spoke through a female translator or something the one time I heard him,
Yeah, I don't know.
And isn't his idea that then, therefore, since, like you were describing, civilization started just a few thousand years ago or less, not 7,000 years ago, that there's just this entire period of history that's just made up and like inserted in the middle?
So no, this is what the idea is basically that history got butchered. So yeah, it is made up in a sense, whether some parts of it were made up intentionally, other parts of it were made up by accident, which can happen.
Yeah.
Think about recalling the events of your week last week. Any part of that you get wrong on the recall is faking history in a sense, making stuff up.
True.
So he's of the opinion that a lot of the inconsistencies, the issues arose off of accident, and that these historians, they did try to represent what happened as accurately as possible, but due to later interpretations of these records, it got butchered. There's other people that they're of the opinion that it's more sinister, that it wasn't just these people messed it up. These people messed it up on purpose to cover up this or that or some other thing. Who messed stuff up and why for various reasons depends on who you talk to. But I think that there is some good reason to suspect that potentially that was happening in some parts of the world, especially in the English world in the UK. Their history is kind of sketchy, in my opinion, just to say the least about it.
Can you elaborate on that?
Okay, I'll elaborate. Fine, you pushed me. There's this guy, Archbishop Matthew Parker. He is okay. I'll bring it right back to the fundamentals because I've been working on my way of presenting this stuff, and for the most general audience, people that literally have no clue at all about English history, the fundamental record for English history is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. That's where most narratives about English history are based on. This Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is made up of a bunch of different works. 9 of them, I think, is the largest count. 7, I think, is the minimum count. But basically, these 7 works, there's a couple of them that are labeled, I think, manuscript A through F, or I potentially. It's again been a minute since I looked at this, but I do remember that when I only looked deeply into one. So basically the idea is that they all appear out of obscurity. We don't really know where they were prior to like the 16th century. All of them are named after 16th century individuals, or later even, I think. One of them's named after Parker, one of them's named after Laud, and the other like 5 or 6 are named after Cotton. And these guys are all from much later than when the manuscripts are supposedly reporting on. Now, Archbishop Parker is the one that I looked into quite a bit. I've got questions pending on the internet that have not yet been answered about what's up with that guy. But this dude bragged about being able to falsify documents. Even if he thought it was from God directing him to do it, he offered his services to other people to falsify documents to the best of his ability to recreate these ancient texts, which was a practice at the time. Like, this wasn't just in England, but it's one of the cases I'm more familiar with, where he had a whole entire crew of people dedicated to this, like people for making the bindings, for writing the pages, like for touching things up. And that's the guy that this manuscript is attached to. Nobody, even from what I understand, no one knows when it was actually named after him. So
you would only name it after this guy if you wanted to indicate fraud, right? Like, why would you choose that person?
Well, he has quite a reputation. When you read reports about him, he's the saintly, godly guy who accidentally just happened to forge all these manuscripts. Don't mention that part. Yeah. But he's held in high respects even today still. And it's weird. The whole situation is weird to me. The manuscripts, the place that they're held is called the Parker Library. And I don't think anyone's yet told me when that was actually named that. I have done as much as I can to figure out when the Parker Library was named the Parker Library. I haven't figured it out yet. Weird. Even the manuscript itself, it was associated with Parker and it was in his collection. And it's one of the most important Anglo-Saxon Chronicle things, but nobody knows where the guy that gave it to him got it from. And he got it from his friend Wotton, Dr. Nicholas Wotton, I think is his name. And it's just weird. That's what I mean when I say that English history is sketchy. The one thing that I've looked into a lot is provenance studies, which is the history of an object, or the history of ownership of an object. And so for the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, we have a number of manuscripts, and basically nobody's actively looking into their provenance from what I'm aware of right now, for authentifying or authenticating them. And it's just weird to me. These are supposedly the core documents for English history.
Yeah.
Came from, right? We got them.
That seems wildly inappropriate. I don't know, but especially if you put this much weight on history like we do as a civilization, it's so much of our psyche and our I guess, psyche, just that we think that we know what's going on and where we came from. And then when you find out that like maybe it's so far off that it's mind blowing, it's very strange. And to think that people have just not put that much time or effort into figuring out what's actually going on, or they've intentionally worked really hard to hide what's actually going on. But I'm never really clear on why you would want to hide that. Why would you care that much to work that hard to hide that much of history?
That's why I think it probably boils down. Well, I try to avoid probabilities, but that's why I think it boils down to just human disinterest. People just aren't interested. They don't care. And I think it was in your What is a Cult video that you brought this up, is that people got to work. Like, they don't have the time to sit around and learn about all this stuff. Like, they got to do what it takes to pay the bills. And if you get vacation time, that's fantastic. Like, any free time that you can get is useful. But that's why it's difficult too. When I get on some of these platforms, I'm still not established well enough to do this full time. I don't make very much money off of this, but I'm trying to get that base where I can do this full time. And even having to say this right now is taking up time that I could be talking about other stuff. And so I'm hoping to get eventually to the position where I never have to bring it up, because I know I'm already covered. But I think this is really important research, especially understanding the nature of reality and where it comes from, and human history, if that means anything to you. Really, like, without a conception of history, it's really difficult to plan for the future. If it wasn't for everybody's effort to establish the calendar and timekeeping and that have preceded us, we wouldn't even be here talking right now. It'd be a mess.
Well, it worries me too when you're talking about timekeeping and how ancient people kept time with the sun and the moon and the stars, and that's how we knew. And every child in that society, I'm guessing, would have some at least basic understanding of that, if not like a pretty profound understanding of that. And today, how many people have any understanding of it? Like, I mean, probably very few people. And so if we suddenly lost some other faculty or ability, like, this would all start to, fall apart even more. And if we don't have a good idea of where we're coming from, and it just also makes me think of like how quickly things change, if that's how recent, things like Mesopotamia or the start of civilization have been.
So that's one thing that interests me too, is the idea that potentially humans, they didn't get into the Americas 10,000 years ago or so, I think is what is believed. But I wonder how fast would people be able to get from one spot to another? Like, I wonder about this. I haven't really written about it or posed it to any professionals, or, well, what would you call them? Specialists. So there's a lot of specialists that aren't that professional.
True.
But there's how long would it take to get? So with nomadic tribes, there's tribes that used to keep moving. I think they're still today. They even sleep on the move. And so how long would it take to get them from like Egypt or Istanbul to America? Like, what really would be the minimum amount of time that we're looking at here? If there was a tribe of people that was constantly on the move and didn't stop, like,
it's very interesting.
Talking about, I don't know. Nobody that I'm aware of has ever even thought of asking that or done a study on it yet.
But if I'm going to venture a guess, I would guess it'd be closer to years than thousands of years.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I think I Googled it one time. I think it's called the Mongolian race or something, but it's basically like the longest horse race in the world, and they get it done in like a matter of days or something, like maybe a week and a half. They do like 4,000 miles, and this is all off memory. Like, I could have butchered that so bad just now.
We'll take it with some salt.
Whatever I just said, if it's enough to get you to be able to figure it out, then I did enough there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did look into it briefly, and people can cover some distance on horses like pretty quick.
True. Yeah. That's a really good point. When you're saying that too, I'm like imagining like somehow humans just like appeared on Earth. Like, this was like a created fucking realm, and we were just like, bloop, see what you guys do, run. And we all just like went and exploded and found different corners. And like, I'm sure that's not what happened, but that's what I was picturing when you're like, how long would it take humans to reach like all corners of the Earth?
Like, for real though, how long? And what factors are there? It's not like that's been a research subject. Like, you got the brightest minds focused on this one topic, this question, but Yeah, it's wild just even how many questions there are like this that have never even been thought of or talked about. We could be the first ones to talk about this on air on a podcast, because I'm not
True.
aware of podcasts that have talked about this.
That's a good point. I love it. And then when I was saying that too, when you're talking about it too, I was like, human race, like we are racing each other to the various corners of the earth. You figured out using astronomy, or someone used astronomy to figure out when Revelation might have been written. When might have that have been, according to astronomy?
That was Fomenko. He's dated it to 1486, in October is when that would have been able to be viewed. I don't know how legitimate that is. Honestly, out of all the zodiacs and horoscopes that he has, that is the one built upon more of the sketchier ground as for its validity and authenticity. I think there's a lot of verses in Revelation that could still be interpreted to get astronomical data, but at the same time, I think it might be too butchered as it is to be able to get anything meaningful out of it. Another issue is that potentially, I don't think he accounted for this, but he dates them based off of the location in which they are reported to have occurred. And these could be stories taken from a different area and only recorded in a certain area. True. And so where they think it happened in one location, it really happened 1,000 kilometers north or something. And I think that would affect the dating of it as well. So, and that is, again, one of these reasons why it's not a settled science. I know you said it at the beginning. I don't know why anyone says it's a settled science, but there's it's almost a given that scientists and historians are at each other's necks to correct them wherever they think they're wrong. And there is definitely not a huge consensus when it comes to this, especially because there's no specialist. There's, like I said, there's not a degree in chronology. I want to establish a degree in chronology so that you can have awesome. But as of right now, there's the best that you can get for a chronologist as a hobbyist, without any real formal training through a systematic setup, which I'm trying to create to really streamline people to be able to give you a comprehensive understanding of chronology. How do we even look into the past and understand it? And so I'm doing that on my own, but it's tricky to cover all aspects of chronology.
It's really, well, when you were saying you wanted to go to college and do this, I was like, why? Because in my head, I'm like, I don't really know why anyone goes to college anymore. What is your degree actually going to be good for in an economy that is completely screwed and continuing to be more screwed all the time? And especially...
Well, I can tell you why.
Well, but what you just said, I'm like, that's actually a great reason to go and get all the degrees you can, is to be able to establish this as a, I'm losing the word for it, but... subject of thought, discipline. Thank you.
No, but yeah, I'm going to school right now because I wanted to make connections with other people. That I don't think anybody getting a history degree is doing it because they're not interested in history and they just want a paycheck.
No.
Every single history major that I've talked to is in it because they have a passion for history.
Absolutely.
And I do too. And so I wanted to connect with people that are going to be getting invested in this. They're throwing hundreds and thousands of dollars at an education. You got to be interested in this.
And they might still be at a point in their learning where they're a little bit more open-minded too, which would be nice to be able to throw ideas against people who aren't yet, completely cemented into their stale worldview.
Right. Yeah, there's that. I mean, the people that I've talked to, they're not I've been surprised at just how varied academia is. Some of these ideas that I've talked to quite a few different history majors, from bachelor to PhD level, about Fomenko's new chronology. And I've been surprised at how few of them have actually lashed back at it by calling it absurd or trying to tear it to shreds right off the bat. There's this idea that it's been universally rejected by historians. The majority of historians I've talked to don't know anything about it, much less are educated enough to reject it.
Right.
Most historians I talk to don't like math. And they're vocal about it. They don't like math. And so chronology, being a product of applied mathematics, it's not too appealing to historians, even though chronology is the soul of history. You can't have it without chronology.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's often people are like, oh, you're either in like the soft sciences and the liberal arts, or you're in the hard sciences and mathematics and these sorts of things. And they're never the twain shall meet. And it's not really always true, as you and many other people show. You know, you can be into both, you can be into many things. It's okay.
Really,
Um,
the schism between the humanities and the sciences seems to have been a short-lived phenomenon. Science and humanities, they'd been intertwined since their birth.
yeah.
It wasn't until recently, within the last 100 or 200 years or so, that the split occurred, and it's starting to go back away now. Where there more people are understanding the interconnectedness, because like you can't do any scientific study without history. You need to understand how to chart the history, understand what's already been talked about, and so on and so forth. So
And I mean, really, we could extend that to almost everything. There's nothing that can be done in a vacuum chamber because we're human beings and we are all, everything is intertwined here, you know. And it's cool to try to look at things as isolated as possible to learn what you can from it, and then you, I think, are wise to always then put it back into the sort of milieu and the bigger picture and see like how it bounces around there, because that's just real life. Seems to me that things should interact like that. I have a random question. Do you know anything about the Antikythera device?
yeah, I actually just posted an article on it recently.
Oh, cool.
It's a yeah, Antikythera, I think is what it's called.
Antikythera.
The there was one of the books or articles I was reading. It showed how to pronounce it, and one of those syllables there's an emphasis on it, but I can't remember which syllable. Not something I'm terribly familiar with, but to my understanding, it's a first century, it's pre-AD, pre-Common Era clock, astronomical clock that tracks the motion of the planets, and
Yeah.
it has the Metonic cycle, which I think is the every time the moon and the sun are back in the same spot again, is every 19 years their movements sync up, and it's called the Metonic cycle.
Wow.
Could be wrong about that, so don't take my word for it. I'm more into history than astronomy,
Yeah.
but I do have to know a bit of astronomy to talk about history. So the mechanism, it's interesting because it wasn't discovered until much really recent, and it completely changed the conception of historians of science and historians of timekeeping, because the Greeks at that time were not suspected to have any type of technology like that. And so,
And it's like intricate. I mean, there's like layers and layers. I saw a video once where they animated the like 3D of like how it would have to all put together, and I'm like, this is profoundly amazing. And we don't make anything like it today.
I think it could be made today.
It could be made today. It has been. It's been made out of Legos, in fact. But we don't.
Has it?
Yeah, somebody did a Lego Antikythera mechanism. It's pretty rad.
That's wild. So yeah, no, but yeah, there's no real practical use for it except for as an example or a model of what they had. But yeah, it's an interesting one too, because in one sense it changed the conception of history. I think some people tried to say it was fake, or it was dropped there at a later day. But I think the archaeological evidence and epigraphical evidence shows that it does belong with the other stuff in the boat.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. The idea is that they didn't have mechanisms like that again until the Renaissance. And so some 1400 years later. And I'm open to the idea still that it could be from that time period, and that there's just as there's people that basically have jetpacks and can fly around and do all sorts of stuff, and then there's also still people living in the bush. To say that this progressive notion of history, that these things couldn't exist side by side, to have a boat full of commoner stuff as opposed to the stuff that they would have in the higher ranks, history, in my opinion, is still very hazy. There's not enough people really looking into it, like comprehending what they're doing. There's a lot of read and repeat, and not enough of comprehending that you don't have to accept it all. Like, you can question people. And even, I guess, like historians, they do ask a lot of questions, but I've run into enough that it's concerning to me that there's a place not being met in the curriculum, that these history majors are getting out without knowing some of these fundamental things.
And not asking the right questions in order to find it.
Yeah, that's another thing is that oh, who remarked it? I can't remember, but it was I enjoyed reading his works. I have the name on my website somewhere. I know where to find it, but I'm not going to bother doing that right now.
Yeah.
It was that good history writing starts with a good question.
Hmm.
And so without a good question, you can't write good history. And I have so many questions pending that have just never been explored by anyone. There's only so much time on the clock for me. Like I spend the majority of my days looking into this type of stuff, and I have to focus in on specific topics. I can't do it all on my own. And so every once in a while, I have to leave questions up pending. And I have those questions pending on my website. If you ever come across them and you're like, this is still pending, it's because nobody has responded to it yet. I haven't gotten a response. And it's a little disheartening, but also encouraging that I could inspire people to potentially want to answer those questions.
Yeah.
And
I would say
because
that's a success because most people aren't thinking and aren't trying to and don't find any reason to. And so it's really cool if you find any people who are contributing or helping you do that.
And then if they do, I'm the inspiration for what they did, which means I had an impact on history writing.
Yeah.
And that's what I would love to see. Like I was mentioning earlier, I'm still not able to do this full time, like with the support I get. So if you're watching this, you like this, support me on Patreon or donate. But I don't want to just make enough to support myself. I want to hire people to be able to support them too. And that happens by everybody giving just a tiny little portion. Like literally my Patreon's $1 a month. So it's like a quarter a week.
Yeah.
And if I've got 4,000 friends on Facebook, if each of them, that's like so few people. I think there's 200,000 people in this city alone.
Mm-hmm.
If like even a 0.1% of them gave me $1 a month, I'd be able to do this full time and even start being able to hire extra help, which is, it's incredible. It's just how to go about gaining that support. I just have to keep talking to more people.
Yeah.
But
you get people as you go. I have very few still, but
I have an article on my website titled See Truth Goals, and it's all the things I want to do through this thing. So if you're not sure about supporting me, you can see what my vision is and say, do I support this vision? Like, is this something I feel good about giving to? Like at $12 a year, that's a fantastic bargain to contribute, become a patron, and potentially a historic, like a very important development in historical studies. And not only historical studies, but being able to teach a large audience of people about what we really know about our past, instead of presenting it in a very dogmatic way, but in a way that the simplest kid could verify.
And don't you wish that teachers had that same attitude? Because that's actually the type of thing that I think people do enjoy, is being like, oh, wait, this is still up for investigation. Like, I still get to evaluate things and determine for myself what is happening. I don't know any human being who didn't at least start out loving that, you know, that idea of being able to be the one who gets to decide and acknowledge and weigh everything and figure out what's going on. Like, that's what we all want to do. That's exciting. That's an adventure. That's a mystery.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I know other people love it too. And so I want to create a curriculum. I want to get a school up. I want to get a research laboratory. I'd love to get an observatory built, to make a library, to get a garden and have a museum. Big plans. So check out that article, See Truth Goals, if you want to see what I'm all about and what I want to do in the future here.
That's awesome. And I love your emphasis on asking questions, because this is the thing eventually as a teacher that I realized, like, if we actually want to teach kids, which we're not doing right now, then we would have to at least have some sort of emphasis on logic, you know, just think how to think, period. And then, and actually teach people how to ask questions. Unfortunately, when you're a child, like a small child, you're full of them. You're like brimming over with them. Like most children are like constantly asking questions about everything. And we're slowly, I think, trained out of that. But if we kept that alive, the world would be a much more vibrant and informative and informed place. But by the time you get to most of the kids that I was teaching, you literally couldn't get them to brainstorm like 5 or 10 questions about literally anything. Ask a question about anything in the whole universe. Nothing.
That's why this is another spot in my life where I wonder how much my childhood education played into the person I am today, because we had logic classes in grade school.
Wow.
Like,
Yeah, that's not even a
that's not
thing
something that people
anymore.
usually get.
No.
Like, I remember very vividly being the school I was in split, and so I only had one other student in my 6th grade class,
Wow.
and we were doing logic exercises in the basement of this church.
I did have
And
logic when I was a small child too. I forgot. That's so weird.
so maybe that played into where you're at today too.
Well, it definitely did, but I was one
Yeah.
of like 5 other kids that got it and no one else did.
So yeah, it's like, come on, this is weird, but whatever. Teaching logic, that's another thing. When I first started doing this, I had Fomenko Studies, which was my Facebook group to talk about Fomenko's new chronology, and I had something called Think Well, which was my clever term that I came up with to promote thinking well.
Yeah.
And
it's needed.
How do we avoid thinking fallaciously, and what are the various biases of the mind that can distort our perception of reality? Those were the questions at the center of Think Well. And while I've put that on pause, I still advocate Think Well, to really critically think this through. Like, is what I'm saying accurate? And if it's not, like, how can I become more accurate in what I'm saying?
And like you said, epistemologically, like, how do I know if I even know this or not? How do I know if it's accurate or not? How do I go about figuring that out?
So epistemologically, yeah, how do I know this? But even ontologically, what is this? What am I even talking about right now? Those are things that, yeah, I ask questions I have a series called Scholarly Snippets where I interview people with history degrees or related degrees. And because I want to see what other people have gone through and their educational experience and what they learned. And it helps me understand the world that I'm getting into, pursuing a degree for myself, kind of to know what to look out for, what to expect. But it's interesting. I'll ask them questions, and sometimes I wonder, I've never asked them if they know what ontology is or epistemology or eletheology, but I doubt any of them know what the third one is, because it's such
I've never heard of eletheology.
It's not even really a term that's used. Like, it's basically just a sub-discipline of the discipline of epistemology. So epistemology is the study of knowledge, the theory of knowledge, and eletheology is specifically the study of truth, or the nature of truth. And so as opposed to studying both false and true, just studying the truth, which is, it's still something to be aware of that is in existence, that people have proposed that term, and that there is a bit of literature on eletheology. Epistemology still, I'd be interested in seeing how many of them are familiar off the top of their head. I almost want to do like a surprise quiz, like a pop quiz at the beginning of the episodes, that like get them to agree to doing that, because I wouldn't want to spring a pop quiz on someone if they didn't agree to
they didn't know it was coming.
answering that. But it'd be interesting to see just how much that is a part of the history curriculum, because I've only taken one semester. I took one history class for getting my bachelor's, but it's a mess. And the ones that they have available online, there's a lot of free history courses on the internet, and those ones are kind of a mess too. Like, it just leaves me asking more questions than what are answered, and with no way to figure out the answers.
In my college experiences, I've been very lucky to have actually really incredibly robust history departments that are full of people who are just ridiculously intelligent. So like, history is always known in college, I think, as like the department that's the most staunch about quality. So that's been lucky, at least. But so I hope you find that too wherever you're going.
I did not. And here, this is a study I just did over the last couple weeks here. So while looking into colleges that I might want to go to for my master's, if I ever end up getting that, I compiled a list of the top 50 history universities in the world, schools that teach history that are renowned for their history curriculums. And I wanted to see how many of them, I wanted to see when their history departments were established. Because if you're in the top 50 schools in the world for teaching history, I'd imagine you have a history department. So I created a list of the top 50 universities when they were founded, and then if I could find the info when their history departments were founded. And so I ended up limiting the study to just their websites. Does their Department of History or History Department or Faculty of History, whatever word they use to describe that group of people, does their website for that have information about when that was founded? And it turned out that only 24% of them had information like that.
That's really ironic.
These are the top 50 universities in the world for studying history. 24% of them had information about when they were founded on their website. I'm trying not to laugh, and it's just like, come on. History departments.
It's like a tattoo artist with no tattoos. You're like, wait a second.
Yeah, kind of like this? That. And I imagine the information exists out there somewhere, but on their website, like that, if you're going to be rigorous about history, that might be something you might want to add on there. But I wanted to put it in perspective. So I went to those same 50 schools known for history and went to their statistics or their math department websites to see if they had information about when those were founded. 66% of them did. So the history departments, at least as far as their websites are concerned, yeah, they're underperforming compared to the statistics departments.
That's very strange.
Which it is I think it's strange.
Yeah.
Maybe to some people out there, it's perfectly normal because that's just the way it is. But in my opinion, it strikes me as quite odd. And it's something that potentially maybe somebody will see this video and they'll want to send an email to them and they'll be like, hey guys, maybe you should do this.
Yeah.
I haven't been bothered enough to reach out to each of them to say anything, but if they end up adding that, I would imagine that I might have had something to do with it.
Yes, that would be nice. Well, you've already mentioned where people should go to support you and your work. But what will you remind us once again and let us know if there's anything else that you want to add to like plans you have or anything going on that you want people to know about or specific maybe articles that you have out that you want people to check out or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, my website is at www.ctruth.today. That's C-Truth is in C-T-R-U-T-H, the letter C, then truth. And my website, it's laid out to be really easy for new people. My homepage, there's a link right at the very top that says new to C-Truth, start here. And that link will take you to an article that kind of gets you familiar with how to navigate the website. So it's got a ways to explore the website article in there. It's got the about section for C-Truth in there, and then some history basics, some just basic stuff. If you've never ever studied history, it's a very short article that just kind of gets you interested in that. But the ways to explore the website helps you navigate it to look for specific content. I've got quite a few things coming up. I'm planning on releasing Scholarly Snippets Season 2 sometime this year. So that's me talking to people with history degrees about history. That stuff we don't really ever talk about, sketchy history or the state of the history education today. But we do talk about what it takes to become a degree holder in a historical field. And so that can be interesting for some people.
Yeah.
And other than that, I'm working on a lot of articles on calendars. So timekeeping and understanding that as part of studying chronology. Timekeeping chronology is the study of time.
Yeah.
And so timekeeping is an obvious need to know if you want to be an expert in chronology.
Absolutely.
I'm working on that, but I'm also going to get back as soon as I'm done with that to my studies into fakes and historical deception, which I have quite a bit of information on. I have a series that's got 2 episodes public on YouTube. The rest are on the Patreon account, but it's called Killing Time, and it's my investigation into historical deception. And so I go through all sorts of confirmed examples or arguments of actual deception. And then I also speculate on other stuff too that potentially could be fake that nobody has thought about before. So that's also very interesting.
Do you want to give us a little teaser for one of those examples so that people know kind of what to expect?
So yeah, there's Well, the first time I went through it, it wasn't as thorough as I'm going to do this time. But yeah, for an example, there's this statue called the Laocoon, and it's supposedly a very ancient statue. But there's evidence, in my opinion, that it's a forgery by Michelangelo, the famous Renaissance artist. And so that would change the perception of the past. Another thing is the whole Archbishop Parker thing that I mentioned earlier. Talking about that, there's like no information about Parker on YouTube, much less his manuscripts and his activities. So talking about that, talking just even about plagiarism is an interesting thing. So I'll be in the next season of Killing Time, I'll be talking about plagiarism versus mystification. So plagiarism is taking someone else's work, presenting it as your own. Mystification is taking your own work, presenting it as someone else's. And trying to determine when this happened is a nearly impossible task in some situations. And one thing that, like, it's rampant in colleges, apparently, like, it's a very common thing for students to plagiarize from each other. And so when we're talking about these ancient documents, we didn't even get to talk about basically any of my stuff on the website, but I've gone through and looked into the provenance of a lot of these ancient documents, medieval documents, that are the fundamental ones for what we base history on. And they all date a lot later than when they were supposedly written. And so to say that it's not plagiarism or mystification of some other source, it's still up for debate, like, as to how valid a lot of this stuff is or where it came from. So those are two really interesting topics. I get into talking about forgery and hoaxes quite a bit. The distinction there being that a forgery is meant to deceive someone indefinitely. Hoax is meant to be revealed at one point or another at the detriment of whoever was fooled by it.
Good point.
And then there's this thing, I think it's called the faux or the folks, which is the gray area, because, like, say somebody makes a hoax, they die, or they can't reveal it in time, then it goes on indefinitely as a deceiver. And so determining when those things popped up is difficult. I'll be getting into talking more about Renaissance forgeries in the next one. There's a lot of really interesting stories about this painting that couldn't have been painted by human hands, and there's a whole forged origin story for it and where it came from. There's another one, the Codex Sinaiticus, one of the most popular biblical manuscripts, is potentially a forgery by this guy Simonides in the 19th century. It's a really interesting subject, and, like, as far as all the other manuscripts, there's just so much to talk about. Like, when it comes to faking history, there's what I was talking about earlier. I kind of get into the two types of forgeries, like the two means of deception. Either I can create something that in a way that I think you think it should look like, or I can create something in the way that it actually should look like, which is an interesting distinction as well. So yeah, all that kind of stuff I'm looking into. But as of right now, I am putting that just not completely on pause, but somewhat on pause to get through this massive books I just got on calendars. I got 11 books for Christmas. There's maybe like 10,000 pages of them. So I'm going to just rip through those, understand it, and then get right back to talking about deception, because that's what is really fascinating to me, the authentication and trying to, how do we determine? And there's like barely any studies into forgeries. There's a lot, but not very extensive ones. They're mostly on a case-by-case basis. I'm doing a survey kind of all the literature already, and then kind of assessing the state of studies into deception.
Wow. It's like all the ways that you've covered that history could be completely incorrect are so many, like you said, ranging from like the just accidental, like this is just the way it ended up being recorded, but it was just misremembered, or just like whatever happened, to the straight up nefarious, like forgeries and intentionally misleading that is never meant to be revealed, like, and everything in between. And there's like one thing that we probably know for certain, which is that we don't actually know history.
Well, yeah, it's something that some people say history is fake. It's a lie to agree upon. I don't necessarily share that always. Like, I think history can be determined, but figuring out if you've determined it correctly,
Yeah.
it's a very gray area. It You have to have some really solid evidence for making arguments, and I just don't think it exists for a lot of these arguments that have been made.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think it can be known, and I think you're doing an excellent job laying out the foundations for how we can know that,
Oh, yeah.
the epistemology for it. But I think in general, most people are pretty deluded, not even knowing this, so not meaning to be, like, just like we don't know, you know?
Well, yeah, people are blank slates when they're born. I know there's some arguments against that, but that's what I hope maintain. And as far as I'm aware, that's basically been the truth, is that until you're exposed to something, it is a cult. It's hidden from you, not for any intentional purpose, but it's hidden. It's outside of your realm of knowledge. And so, oh, what's the saying? There's more things in heaven and on earth than in your philosophies, Horatio. Yeah. So it's like, we're never going to be able to get every single thing that exists in the world out in our mind to try and process it and make sense of it. But I think working together and trying to figure it out, identifying a strategy, really laying down a strategy and then approaching it from that. I'm working on laying down that strategy. I need more people to come help me if I'm ever going to make, like, one pair of hands can do a lot, but two in unison with others, we can do tremendous things. And so I'm still just kind of making this call to arms to come help out with historical studies. If you have downtime, there's no reason ever that you should be bored. If you're bored, volunteer and come help me out. I am super easy to contact, and I can tell you exactly what needs to be done. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're bored, then you're boring. So get over it and do something else. So one more thing. Who is the father of history?
Yeah, that depends on who you ask. I have an article on this, actually, and I think there was like 11 or so different responses with a few up for debate, but basically it's a mixed bag of responses as to who the father of history is.
So it's not Herodotus.
It could be Herodotus. He has been called. So that's an ontological question. Who is the father of history? Which differs from who has been called the father of history.
True.
Because with the laws of logic, A is not B. And so two people can't both be the father of history. It's either Herodotus or Thucydides. They can't both be the single father. It's two options. So logically, determining who the father of history is, it's such a broad term too. Like, what does it take to become the father of history? It's such a weird question, but it is a question that's been asked, and many people have answered it. But I have a study on that on my website. If you type into the search bar father of history, you'll see it, and I think it's titled The Fathers of History, because I have all the different people listed that I found so far. There could be more out there that I'm not aware of yet.
That's awesome. I loved it because it's kind of one of those questions that is probably the whole reason why nobody knows anything is because we don't ask them. But it's like, it almost seems like, well, someone figured it out. And I'm sure I've heard of it before. Like, there has to be someone. But when you get down to it, like, exactly all the things you said, how would you even determine, and who's claiming it and why? And like, yeah, how are you even asking the question? All these things. It's pretty.
Just 2 seconds real quick. I got to go do something. I will be back in like 5 seconds.
Okay. Which is funny because I was just going to shut down the show, but now I have a chance to see some comments. We have so many fun people in the chat today. We have Chris Phoenix. We have James Maiden. James, what's up? This is all happening because of you and your show. Lindsay Smith, Gordon Hamill. All you guys out there, it's nice to see you guys. Well, I was actually just going to close us down by asking you what your final words of wisdom are for people. What if there's one kind of thought or idea or question you want to leave people with to think on, what would you say?
I would just leave you guys with the idea of continuing to question what you think you know. That's something that I do on a daily basis. I identify, what do I think and why do I think this? And you can come up with some really interesting opinions on that. Another thing is, it never hurts to become organized. Kind of what Lindsay was saying and what I was saying, we both started websites to get more organized. It does not hurt. In fact, it only seems, at least to me, to have helped organize my own beliefs. You might even be surprised at what you find out you hold to believe, or you might be surprised to find out that you believe in something that upon second scrutinizing, you might not actually believe it as much as you think you do, even really mundane things. But it's a trip. So check out my website, get involved, and never stop thinking about what you're thinking.
Very well said. Thank you so much. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the historicity expert, Stephen Sorensen. Stephen, thank you so much for all you do and for being here tonight. It was very fun to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the one thing that I know for sure is that I don't know everything. And that makes all the difference. Being able to hold a multitude of possibilities in our minds without needing to land on a sure thing benefits our progression through the muck of myriad realia, helping us sort ever closer to the truth. And in the end, we may never land on something sure and solid. But then again, nothing sure and solid ever did exist on this plane, did it? The only constant is change, and the only truth is beyond change. So until we can find the expanse within and remember it isn't from here, but only visiting here, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Mind is elusive, time is exclusive, round trip all inclusive, the island is abusive. Jekyll's wearing hides in plain sight lines, heckle devils blind by strange slight lines. Slight designed as their own resource, if they control the narrative there's no recourse. Prophecies diseased by a strong overreach, time ain't a seat that sits idly by well preached. Watching bodies wither as they slither like a scaled river on a land of which they don't own a sliver. Fatal error and avoidance, symbiosis, lack of focus. To understand balance from the rover to the lotus, from light to the dotus, gifted through osmosis. Luminance went out a while ago, they didn't notice. Masturbating currency, squatting in the dark chamber, disconnected from Akasha, watching dissipate the vapors.
You still don't get it, do you, boys? There ain't no countries anymore. No more good guys. They're running the whole show. They own everything, the whole goddamn planet. They can do whatever they want. What's wrong with having it good for a change? And they're gonna let us have it good if we just help them. They're gonna leave us alone. Let us make some money. You can have a little taste of that good life too. I know you want it. Hell, everybody does.
Do it to your own kind.
What's the threat? We all sell out every day. Might as well be on the winning team.